Okay, thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to say, obviously, thank you very much for inviting me here. I had a bit of an epic journey coming via Norway, which was actually covered in masses of snow, but it's great to be here. And it's wonderful to see so much work being done in Slovenia on mountain biking and cycling destination development. And okay, so basically, yes, I come from Scotland. Some of you can tell from my accent I'm not Scottish, so you can take say as many jokes as you like about the midges. They're all actually true. Probably the same with the rain as well. But having said that, looking outside the window, it rains here as well. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about, and having followed James, then there is a little bit of synergy with what he says. So let's just say that my presentation is going to reinforce something about what he says. It's worth saying at the moment that I do academic research. I don't claim to be an expert on mountain biking. Claiming to be an expert on anything is dangerous. So I basically do academic research into adventure tourism. And we've just started an Interreg project on adventure tourism. It's in Northern Europe, mostly in Scandinavia, and I'm leading that. And we see, Interreg money, all the EU money is there to be got at. And it's good to see that you've been doing some projects on utilizing European money. We have a range of partners who are keen to do something on cycling, on mountain biking, places like Norway, Portugal, and it would be great to actually hook up with somebody here. I've already spoken to a couple of people about looking for the right funding to do a project on destination development, mostly for mountain biking. That's because I'm a mountain biker, not a roadie. But if we could actually find the right fund, if we could find the right idea, it would be great to involve Slovenia and Scotland in a big project, really, as well as these other partners. Right. Okay. So sorry, I'm supposed to be getting on. Right. Okay. So really, what I'm looking at is what's up here. So a quick look at the value of mountain biking in Scotland. A little discussion on how cycling and mountain biking can aid economic development at the regional or local level, and a few lessons from Canada, from New Zealand, and obviously from Scotland. So I'm basically drawing upon, I did my PhD on mountain biking, a really slack subject for a PhD, as my friends would constantly joke with me about. You can't do a PhD in mountain biking, but you can do a PhD in anything. And I did mine on mountain biking because I love mountain biking. I've also done some supervision of master's theses in the Yukon in Canada. So I get to draw upon some of these lessons. And we also do academic and consultancy research for the body that develops mountain biking in Scotland, called Developing Mountain Biking in Scotland. Very original. And I've been biking for about 10 years, and I've ridden in lots of places. There are loads of places I haven't ridden. I haven't ridden in Slovenia, but hopefully maybe tomorrow I can change that. So there's also some personal experience in here. Okay, now obviously there are loads of sectors, and various people have already today talked about different mountain biking sectors, so I'm not really going to talk about this. My experience is more on mountain biking than on road cycling, but it's clear that quite a bit of what I'm going to say about mountain biking also pertains to road cycling. Okay, so these are some figures. Now we did some of this work. We did a lot of it was done before our time, but it gives you an indication of what people think, or so-called experts think that mountain biking and road cycling is worth in Scotland. And as you can see, they're big numbers. Even like mountain biking, apparently worth somewhere in the region of 60 million euros a year, and that's for just the trips where mountain biking is the primary purpose of that trip. not where the people go on holiday for another purpose and do some mountain biking on the side. So as you can see, it's a lot of money, and there's a lot of projected growth as well. Mountain biking in Scotland has been happening for quite a long time, probably sort of 20 years really, and so it's quite a mature market, but there's still growth. I haven't counted all the purpose-built mountain biking trail centres in Scotland, but I suspect there's probably around 25 of different sizes. You can see that in Scotland, mountain bikers, in common with, I guess, lots of different countries, the US, New Zealand, they tend to be pretty young, they tend to be pretty affluent as well. And while there are many different sectors where they want to camp, or they don't spend so much money in local shops, as James was touching on, then there are a lot of people out there that do have money. They're middle class, they're well educated, they have money to spend. So it's a pretty affluent sector. 1.3 million mountain bike visits to Scotland. That was back in 2009. I suspect it's quite a lot higher. And interesting to note that just under half of those were to purpose-built trail centres, and just over half was to the wild trails. Okay, so I was asked to just touch on attitudes towards biking. There's no doubt that in some of these areas where there's been purpose-built trail centres, the famous set of centres in Scotland is called the Seven Stains, as most of you, or many of you will know, which is actually 8 centres for some bizarre reason, but 8 stains sounds rubbish. So anyway, so there are 7 stains. There's like 7 centres, and they basically grew out of something that James was touching on Bike Park Wales, was that they were kind of depressed areas, and they attracted EU funding through the ERDF. And so somebody somewhere, and also in Wales, a guy called David Davis, along with others, actually saw mountain biking as a kind of a saviour for some of these depressed economies, and applied for funding, persuaded the Forestry Commission in Scotland, in Wales, to actually co-finance some of these developments. And they brought a great range of benefits to local communities, not only in the sort of nearby towns and what have you, but also much further afield. So there's a great multiplier effect, and that's happened across the board. So not only economic benefits, but also the government recognises that cycling has great health benefits. You can't really quantify those so easily. And they also make these places much more attractive places to live. And you see articles in journals talking about places in the UK that have healthy biking scenes, or healthy, say, skiing scenes or what have you, and they are they are actually nice places to live, and they attract people, and that's another sort of more unquantifiable benefit. Okay, so I already touched on many developments with they used EU funding in the 1990s, and these purpose-built trails really helped to help the industry to take off in Scotland. So co-financed by the government. It has to be said that finance in Scotland is more difficult. Obviously, since the 1990s, the EU has expanded somewhat, and obviously, some of these accession countries are taking more, or a bigger slice of the pot, and that's quite rightly too. So there's more. It's more difficult to finance these days for trail development in Scotland. So it's something that needs to be thought about. But again, as James was touching on, that then it needn't be something that is an obstacle to trail centre or to trail development. Okay, so there are some private enterprises that are still developing trail centres, estates, kind of big estates, big landowners. And that they put money in, and they find co-finance, whether some of it is from Europe, some of it could be from national or from regional government. But it needs the right mentality. It needs entrepreneurs. It needs somebody with a little bit of vision, I guess, for the region or for the locality. It probably needs somebody who is a good people person who can actually encourage others and enthuse others to get involved. James has already touched on the importance of infrastructure. In the UK, mountain biking is quite different to my own experience of biking in New Zealand. It's become a really sophisticated product these days, and people have very high expectations of what they want when they go to a trail centre. And I'm not going to repeat what James has said, but really, these expectations are set very high in the UK. It's in contrast to some places where it's all about the ride. But in the UK, the supporting infrastructure is important. There's no doubt about it, and that's from my own personal experience too. Okay, so in terms of land use conflict, I'm not really going to say very much on that. I don't have the time. There aren't many cases of conflict between user groups. It's more of a perception, I think, that mountain bikers are seen as this kind of are seen as young hooligans, or have been in the past, and but there's very little reported conflict between mountain bikers and other users, notably walkers. And my own personal experience is that it's quite a minor issue. We have had a problem with illegal trails in Scotland. Guerrilla trails, they're called. It's basically where local groups or informal groups have gone off and built their own trails in somebody's land. It has caused issues, small issues, but issues nonetheless. And one of the I guess one of the things that needs to be sorted out these days is kind of advocacy and working together with local groups and local landowners to actually to overcome these problems. And make sure that these illegal trails, which cause issues in terms of the landowner and whether they have responsibility, a legal responsibility for what actually happens on these trails. So these are things that need to be sorted out, and part of the role of this national mountain biking body is to actually is to develop local groups where landowners and bikers can get together and sort of iron out these problems. Okay, so I've already talked about capital funding. One important thing that doesn't get mentioned a lot is revenue funding, and that means maintaining trails. It's all very well you getting a massive EU grant to build trails, but what happens when the grant runs out? It has been an issue, and it continues to be an issue, that you need to think about how you're actually going to maintain these trails. Do you actually pay people to do it? Do you actually get local volunteers to do it? But it's something that I think has been not thought about as much as it should have been, and it is important. It is important to think about how you're going to maintain trails, particularly these sophisticated ones that are purpose-built for mountain biking. They do need some looking after. Local opposition, well, there are ways around local opposition. I mean, you will always have people who oppose development of cycling. That's true, but I think there's quite a bit of there's a degree of a lack of understanding, and I think that there are definitely ways to get around this by involving local producers, by involving other local businesses and having some sort of partnership to actually bring them on board, so to speak. And this can be supported by the local public sector. So there's been great work done on a national level by this government body, and also on the regional level as well. And I think that having this kind of support from the public sector is really important, and helps to drive forward some of these initiatives. Okay, I'm not really going to talk about this because it's been talked about before. But I mean, this is what my PhD research was on, or partly on. So the things that you're kind of looking for. Nobody's really mentioned the kind of flow experience yet. I don't want to really talk about flow too much, as that's kind of out of body state that some people might get, you know, when the conditions are completely right. And I think that having kind of fast-flowing single track absolutely is nirvana for a mountain biker. Okay, so some of the development we talked about already, purpose-built trails in the UK. But then, I mean, some people are really into that, and they offer a really condensed adrenaline hit, and that's great if you've got a couple of hours. Or if the weather's bad, that's fine, or it's something to share with your friends. But then a lot of bikers, myself included, prefer riding on natural trails, kind of prefer things a bit wilder and having actual adventures rather than just this kind of feeling of adventure. So I think there's a role for both of these, and the government recognises that in Scotland. And there's a feeling that I think maybe the trail centres, the purpose-built centres, have taken too much of the glory, and there's a need to promote some of the wilder trails, really, and that these kind of really appeal to more experienced bikers in particular. Okay, so in terms of recommendations for development, this is for Scotland basically. So a lot of these things have been talked about already. One of the key things in Scotland is the early development was very much targeted to experienced bikers, and there is a growing recognition that families are more important, or families are very important target markets, as are beginners really, and appealing to both experienced riders and to sort of beginners and to families is really important. So there's been more development of kind of green and blue trails, and that is seen as a great way forward to actually get families in. They spend money, they go to cafes, they do other things as part of their holiday, and so not just looking at experienced bikers, but actually drawing a wider market in. Okay, so I mean, some of these have been talked about already. So obviously having trail centres near to population centres is great. Having cities and towns with their own skills areas, you know, whether they're pump tracks or gravity tracks or what have you, it's seen as it's seen as something that's quite important really in Scotland for developing children and developing future mountain bikers. Branding is important. I hate the fact I live near Loch Ness. You get loads of stupid tourists coming along looking for Loch Ness Monster. But the thing is, Loch Ness is important. You know, it's well known. It's probably the most well-known thing in Scotland. I live next to the Harry Potter Viaduct, which is a really stupid claim to fame, but people recognise it. They see photos and they say, "Hey, it's the Harry Potter Viaduct," and that's where I live. Okay, but anyway, branding and the use of branding is important. So, you know, getting your name out there. I mean, everybody who works in mountain biking circles knows Whistler. Whistler does a great job. It doesn't even have like its own brand. It just is a brand. So yeah, getting your name out there, getting people like James along, and telling a great story about your destination, very important. Obviously, social media has been talked about to death, so I'm not going to say about that. But it's so important these days to spread word of mouth. You know, word of mouth used to be about, you know, spreading the word by mouth, but it's not anymore. It's all about sharing things on the internet, and increasingly on not so much the internet, but obviously through mobile phone. This is a recent development, the Highland e-guide. The importance of you know, developing great information. Information is key to mountain bikers. Okay, if I'm going to make a decision about where I want to go biking, me personally, I need lots of information, and I need it. I need it on the internet. I need it before I go anywhere. So then I make a decision to go there. So like having something like this, an e-guide that tells you all about the trails, it tells you about the accommodation, tells you everything you need to know really. It's got videos embedded in it, so you can watch them online. It's a great resource, and it's just been developed. And this is one of the pages. This is one of our local trails. So as you can see, you know, it's something to bear in mind. Information is absolutely key to getting people coming to visit you as cycling or mountain biking tourists. Um, Very briefly, I'm going to just finish off with talking a few lessons from Canada and New Zealand. The Yukon, as you know, is an extremely wild destination. So really, it has its own appeal in terms of that wilderness feel, in terms of its culture and its heritage. They basically worked tirelessly to develop new trails there. I don't know whether James has been there, but a lot of mountain biking magazines were invited out there to spread the word, really, and that's really what's happening now, that it has developed a kind of reputation as a wild area to ride. In New Zealand, well, New Zealand's very different to the UK. Much of the development has been grassroots because they haven't had the finance to develop like they have in Scotland. So it's a much kind of less sophisticated product, but that's kind of what Kiwis like. So, you know, this kind of wildness, the feeling of wildness, the scenery, the rawness are important. They obviously have amazing branding in New Zealand. You know, there's a whole kind of 100% pure, whether it's true or not. You know, people have an idea about New Zealand, they have an idea about Queenstown, and they've done amazing things in terms of marketing. Okay, so just to wrap up, obviously, you know, there's a massive range of factors that attract people to destinations. I say getting that information out there to your potential customers and clients is really, really important. Cycling, whether it's roadies, whether it's mountain bikers, you know, it can play a pretty major role in terms of destination development. The consumers these days are increasingly sophisticated, and I think you need to take that on board in terms of the facilities and the opportunities that you give them for doing other things as well as mountain biking. We were not all single track minded. And you know, I'm just looking around. I'm looking around at the number of people here today, and I'm looking at some of the brochures, and I think that, you know, Slovenia has some amazing opportunities for mountain bike development. Okay, that's me. Thank you.